Hey folks, Wrong Gamgee here. I just want to briefly announce that the Quick and Dirty RPG system is now available on DriveThruRPG for $4.99. That's almost a 40% price reduction from its original retail price of $8, which makes it easier for you to get a copy of my labor of love. Greetings folks, this is Wrong Gamgee and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. In this video, I'll respond to the points presented by CondorDM in his video titled, Why Most Players Don't Care About Role-Playing and Character Development. Just FYI, this is probably going to be the spiciest video yet. I will first like to present my interpretation of the main crux of his argument before I respond to specific parts. From what I gather, his argument seems to be as follows. Men make up the majority of the TTRPG market. Men yearn to compete and struggle, and any activity in a TTRPG session that detracts from that causes their interest in the session or game to wane. Tactical miniatures-based combat is the apex of competition and struggle in a TTRPG session. Note that this is not as a means to exclude theater of the mind, but by and large, people want to see the minis. Roleplay in appropriate amounts, preferably light and definitely less than time spent on combat, perhaps at an 80-20 ratio in favor of combat, can improve the quality of a TTRPG session. Character development is, at best, an incidental consequence of playing tabletop role-playing games and is a pursuit that CondorDM and those who think like him are indifferent towards. Tabletop role-playing games that violate this ratio in favor of excessive roleplay and character development detract from men's interests in tabletop role-playing games. As a consequence, they fare poorer in the tabletop role-playing game marketplace than games that focus heavily on tactical miniatures-based combat, the apex of competition and struggle in a TTRPG session. To not conform to this way of thinking is to not be manly. To not be manly is to be a beta male pussy. Focusing on role-playing and character development is considered weak beta male bullshit. Men play RPGs to kick ass and take names. There's a demographic within the tabletop RPG hobby that call people who have a strong preference for tactical miniatures-based combat and a disinterest in character development and roleplay stupid or munchkins. Condor acknowledges this by stating that, to a point, they are. Even though they may have, he also adds a qualifier saying that even though they may have this disinterest in roleplay and character development, they could easily do it if so inclined. So it's not a skilled issue. This is reflected in the TTRPG market. As a man, the only way Condor will show up to a TTRPG focused on roleplay and character development is if he were being paid to do so. There is an obvious tone of disgust when it comes to things he considers unmanly, like role-playing and character development, or at the very least, when done more than will be comfortable for him. If the TTRPG hobby were left to theater nerds, 95% of the customer base would leave the hobby because the majority of customers are not actors and don't care for acting. There seems to be some sort of false dichotomy insinuated that the only two options are competition and struggle and doing a theatrical performance, as if there can be no overlap between the mechanical aspects of the game and narrative context and engagement. There is an incorrect correlation between not being interested in role-playing and character development and being stupid. I would also argue that there's also an incorrect correlation between not prioritizing tactical miniatures-based combat or an equivalent apex activity of competition and struggle with weak beta male bullshit. Men think that people that place an emphasis on role-playing and character development are a bunch of coward pussy beta males that aren't worth listening to, and Condor is most likely among those men who hold that position due to his strong inflections when he makes this point. Condor states that he endorses character development and role-playing, but, well, actually more role-playing, not really character development, but not to the extent that role-playing and character development overshadow tactical combat to the point where it's a drama class. While it's okay to have TTRPGs that cater to focusing more on role-playing and character development, the fact remains that there are players that are not interested in those things. Apparently, there is a demographic of people who are trying to convince the majority of the tabletop RPG customer base, men, to steer them away from tabletop RPGs focused on tactical miniatures-based combat and onto games that focus more on role-playing and character development. So here are the points that I agree with. Men do seem to make up the majority of the tabletop RPG customer base. By men, I mean adult cis males without any prescription of some sort of Western traditional masculinity, which he seems to imply. This majority of the tabletop RPG customer base does seek out struggle for their PCs in a tabletop RPG session, primarily in the form of tactical miniatures-based combat. Tactical miniatures-based combat is the apex of competition and struggle in many TTRPG sessions because that's where the stakes are at their highest, life or death, and that's where the grand majority of the rules are focused on, in both processes and character building. As a subpoint, a big reason for this is because Dungeons & Dragons, the largest tabletop role-playing game in the market by far, is focused on tactical miniatures-based skirmish combat and has been ever since D&D 3rd edition. Wizards of the Coast has designed multiple iterations of this game in this manner due to customer feedback. So it's a positive feedback loop between customer feedback and game design. Because of this focus on tactical miniatures-based combat, character death is the definitive lose condition, and a total party wipe is the ultimate expression of losing the game, because no one in the party can help bring their dead party members back to life. So yeah, those are those two subpoints. Now on to the other points that I agree with. TTRPGs that are, let's be honest, less like D&D fare poorer in the market than games that are more like D&D in game design methodology, production value, and marketing power. There are people who critique hobbyists that fixate on tactical miniatures-based combat and character optimization in combat as stupid, and munchkins and other pejoratives that denigrate those pursuits. There are also people who critique hobbyists that place a greater emphasis on role-playing and character development than them as cowardly pussy beta males or communists or some other pejoratives that only seek to shame them in ways that make no sense unless you apply abductive reasoning, i.e. a conspiracy theorist way of thinking. This is invariably a consequence of looking at the world through a rigid cultural and/or political lens, in this case, right-wing traditionalist values. A significant portion of the tabletop role-playing game player base are not interested in role-playing and character development. I can tentatively say that that's the majority of the tabletop role-playing game player base, and for that, I would suggest this: a tactical miniatures-based board game, because that's effectively how they want to play tabletop role-playing games, like a board game or a video game. I am also not interested in tabletop role-playing games that go so far into dramatic abstraction that it looks very unrecognizable as a tabletop RPG when compared to their more contemporary brethren. The best example I can think of in this manner is this game called Henshin, a Sentai RPG, which uses a diceless token system to dictate what actions are available to your character as determined by their archetype. Furthermore, the results of said actions are guaranteed, as opposed to having a chance of things not going as planned. To me, this is definitely story game territory, but that's a discussion for another time. Here are the points that I take issue with. The use and arbitrary distinction between a man and a weak beta male pussy within tabletop role-playing game discourse. Let me put this away. Tactical miniatures-based combat is a facet of the tabletop role-playing game hobby. Role-playing and character development are facets of the tabletop role-playing game hobby. All of these facets involve facing and attempting to overcome challenges, whether successfully or not just tactical miniatures-based combat. Please note once again that I'm not implicitly excluding theater of the mind here. Many games systematize the role-playing and character development aspects, sometimes to the detriment of role-playing because the dice rolls and mechanics detract from immersion, and sometimes to the benefit of role-playing, as the application of those mechanics inform the player of how to role-play their character. It goes without saying that each of these aspects of the tabletop RPG hobby are objectively different from each other. What is not objective and points to a disgust response is when value judgments are placed upon emphasis on each of these aspects, both in isolation and in conjunction with each other. So this is the part where I have to make assumptions here in order to make my argument. By men, I suspect that Condor refers to some idea of a stoic adult male that holds little regard for emotional sensitivity and behaviors that express emotions that don't fall into the realm of competition and dominance, especially those that express vulnerability, frustration, or joy. Also, outside of these competitive endeavors, strong expression of emotion is antithetical to what it means to be a man. The idea of a soldier would probably be a good representation of what it is to be a man for Condor. Defeat the enemy, fight for your side, die for your side, suck it up and drive on. In other words, a disposable utility. I reject that notion of manliness because it reduces what an adult male, a man, can be, similar to how a D&D class restricts your character. It also makes being manly some sort of innate virtue that is in large part yoked upon men due to their sex, and to not min-max into that archetype is to be a weak beta pussy. You know what other demographic are not considered manly in a positive way? Women, which are typically seen as the polar opposite of men. In criticizing an adult male as not being manly, a supposed blanket good or desirable trait, and stating the obvious conclusion that if you're not one way, then you're the other, or more specifically, if you're not a man, then you're a not man or a woman. And that to not be a man, or to be a woman, is to conflate womanhood with a slew of derogatory traits. It's an implication that women are weak, cowardly, and submissive simply due to their sex. Otherwise, why tie in a collection of supposedly positive traits with a sexed term other than that's just how you were brought up? And therefore, it's part of your culture and your worldview. Within the context of tabletop role-playing game discourse, what is considered weak, cowardly, and beta. This is terminology that's used in red pill spaces, which are an outgrowth of the pickup artist community, which is an outgrowth of a synthesis of sales and Western traditional Christian values. In other words, someone's trying to sell you some shit. Otherwise, you're going to pay with shame. We're talking about a cooperative social game where people play make-pretend in a shared imaginary world. We're not talking about war or combat or any facsimile of war or combat, such as sports, business, etc. Condor. Why put people down as weak or cowardly or call them pussies and beta males in a cooperative endeavor. Why posture as some sort of strongman when you're not competing with others in serious real-life stakes? You're not in a fight. You're not in a war. You're not in a business competition with them. By presenting yourself as a strongman or a tough guy, you come off as a braggart with something to prove. You're not coming off as strong. You're coming off as a close-minded, self-righteous. Well, you're coming off as close-minded, self-righteous, and intolerant, regardless of what the TTRPG market mostly caters to. This is why people who display this behavior have been criticized as stupid, not because of their IQ, but more because of their EQ. Furthermore, this abrasive manner that you have only appeals to those who already agree with you and does nothing to make your arguments more valid. For someone like me, who seeks to expose themselves to various schools of thought regarding the TTRPG hobby, this behavior is off-putting, and it pollutes your system-neutral advice. It doesn't have to be that way, and I point to Table Runner Crispy as an example of someone who's very enthusiastic about deeply immersive roleplay, or to Alexander Macris, who states his points in a cogent and measured manner while advocating for his strong adherence to simulationism and incentive-based game mechanics. And if you want to tell me fuck you for tone policing you, that's fine. I'm not trying to limit your freedom of speech or cancel your channel. I'm saying that when you present yourself, or when you present your way as objectively better or manly or whatever the fuck, you're not arguing anything objective here other than popularity. Kind of like what RPG Pundit does. Just like those you critique that also hold up their noses to being stupid and munchkins. You're both different sides of the same coin. Trying to pass this posturing off as manly, or what you wouldn't do unless you were paid to do, is pathetic chauvinism, which is a redundancy because chauvinism is already pathetic, whether or not the chauvinist is built like a Chad. Just saying, that's not my thing, can get that point across without coming off like a chauvinist. What I have to say regarding the different facets of the tabletop RPG hobby also applies to people who call those who strongly prefer tactical combat and optimization over role-playing and character development as stupid and munchkins. To each side, the other is seen as inferior, when in fact, aside from which customer base prefers more than the other, there is no objective assessment to be made regarding inferiority. They're just different, and we all want different things in our tabletop role-playing game activities. In your comments section, Dane Edmonton9687 calls you out on your use of alpha/beta male rhetoric, to which you respond that focusing on that rather than your argument makes them the problem, not you. Let me assure you that I'm not saying that serves no, I'm saying that serves no purpose other than preaching to the crowd. And it also ties into your criticism of folks who have a stronger predilection towards roleplay and character development than to your liking. Attacking their masculinity is your rubric in your argument, which is as nonsensical as claiming that some guy is gay because he doesn't like fishing. It's a misogynistic and probably homophobic non sequitur because of your disgust of men that don't comport themselves like Dirty Harry or some shit in the hobby of playing make pretend with other grown-ass adults. It doesn't serve your mission of offering system-neutral advice except to those who share similar truncated views on masculinity, which I suspect is a minority of TTRPG hobbyists. This is one video where I'm not going to close off with leaving a respectful comment, because I fired off shots at both CondorDM and people who dismiss role players as beta male pussies, and at people who dismiss wargamers as stupid and munchkins. I do, however, ask that you keep the comments relevant. Until next time, folks, play to find out what happens, and despite what others say, or what others may say, your masculinity is not on the line based on how you like to play tabletop role-playing games. Just be you.